Support for Podcast by Night is provided by Midnight Syndicate. To learn more, please visit midnightsyndicate.com. Welcome, everybody, back to Podcast by Night. As promised, this is the long-awaited Gangrel episode. My name's John.
I'm Jen.
And with us tonight, we have a special guest. Go ahead and introduce yourself, Ari.
Hi, I'm Ari.
Well, welcome, Ari. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited about this.
Now, you said, just so everybody knows where you're coming from, that Gangrel is actually one of your favorite clans.
They are absolutely one of my favorite clans. I think they're just a lot of fun.
All right. Well, I happen to agree with you. I love a good nomad as much as the next person. So now that everybody knows what we're going to be talking about, I just wanted to take a moment to shout out to all the people that listen to us out there in the interwebs. Jen, I've actually gotten some emails for people asking advice.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah.
They're asking us for advice? What?
I know. Somebody out there must think we know something. I don't know, but that means it's working, so we'll just keep going with it.
And if you have emailed us or gotten a hold of us, don't worry. We do have your information. We may actually even do a podcast where we do just some Q&A in the future.
That would be awesome. I would love a good Q&A. Everybody loves a good Q&A episode. Somebody have a cat?
I do, but he's on the outside of the room.
So he thinks.
You know what? It's a gangrel.
It is a gangrel. I bet you anything.
It's a gangrel kitty.
It's a gangrel. He's trying to bust in on
That's
the podcast.
right.
He's busted, and I'm just like, I left you outside for a reason.
He's keeping the masquerade. That's all it is.
That's all it is. He's warning me.
That's right. They're coming. They're coming for you. All right. So why don't we get started with the Clan Gangrel?
So yeah, the Gangrel they're misfits. They're wanderers. They are storytellers. They're survivalists. They are one of the clans that are little understood by the rest of the Camarilla, and to be honest, the Gangrel kind of prefer it that way. They're a very wild, unpredictable clan. They are more in tune with nature, with their bestial selves, and they prefer to haunt the edges of civilization. They've always been much more keen on hanging out in the wilds, just on the borders of where cities are. And while most vampires prefer to stay where the humans are in large numbers, the Gangrel have always loved being on those edges where there might be barbarians or other things going bump in the night. They are a reminder to the rest of the so-called civilized kindred just what they too can become. And consequently, they're one of the most changeable and mutable of the vampire clans. It also means they're kind of the one that the Camarilla as a whole tends to look down on a little bit.
Those snobs.
They are snobs. They don't like those barbarians knocking at the door.
Yeah, but the if the gangrel's knocking at your door, they just want, to come in out of the cold. That's all. It's like putting the cat out. And they're like, no, they want to come back in. Like the Flintstones cartoon. When he puts the cat out, the cat jumps back through and says, no, you get out.
And then it wants to go in and then go out. But then it can't decide in or out.
That does, that does sound like a gangrel.
It sounds very much like a gangrel.
That's right. They want to play ball. No, they want to hit the road. No, they came back. No, now they want to go on a walkabout again.
Yeah.
It can get very confusing.
The way I see it is that they always just wanted to view their options first. So they're willing to take a tour and then really make an informed decision before they make a decision. And then maybe they'll regret it.
And then
That's the way I always kind of saw them.
And then they'll maybe leave again.
And maybe they'll leave again. Who knows? What's commitment? Really.
I see why this is your favorite clan, Ari.
So what you're saying is, Ari, is that it's not so much like commitment issues. It's just they're free spirits. They want to keep their options open.
And that's what it's always been about is, why do I need to, choose one thing when I could just do my own path? And, there you go.
You know what? And guess what? I believe we are going to touch on that because of those free spirits that a lot of the Camarilla, you say they look down on them. Jen, that the Ventrue with the snooty, those barbarians, when actually they might be a little jealous.
Maybe they're a little jelly. They're a little jelly that those Gangrel can go and do whatever they want. Fancy free,
That's right.
No ties to no princedoms and elders. They can just roam the world and, live as hobos.
That's well, that's right. I mean, that just goes back to the heart, the nature of the Gangrel as being an outsider. They can trace their roots back to the wanderers and the nomads of human civilization.
Yeah, the Gangrel have never quite conformed to civilization in a larger sense, or vampiric society as a whole. They've just not liked to fit in. They're a very disparate, kind of clan. They are changeable both as individuals and a clan. I mean, not just in terms of their allegiances or in terms of who they're siding with. Like, physically, they're a changeable clan. And because they are nomads and wanderers, and they do like to tell stories, and no two Gangrel ever tell the same story, the origins of Clan Gangrel are a little murky. So unlike some clans who are like, this is our clan, and this is our founder, and this is where we come from, and these are our roots, the Gangrel don't have any of that. Their origin stories, their sense of purpose, their identity, it's all a very changeable kind of situation. There's a bunch of myths that tell where they came from. They're all rooted in folk tales of various different peoples. And sometimes those folk tales get mushed together and, various tribes and peoples. Truth be told, we don't really know what the Gangrel see their origin story is. Because as long as the story you're telling is an entertaining story, then no one particularly cares where you came from or how you got there. The Gangrel just simply know that these are the stories that have been passed around, and that all these stories say the same thing. That the Gangrel, no matter what, no matter where they came from, they are survivors. No matter what happens, the Gangrel will always persevere. Come the end times, it's going to be the Gangrel standing on the top of the mountain. They are survivors.
Right. I love that part about the folk tales, like how you say a lot of the other clans like to be all hoity-toity with, our antediluvian is all blah, 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 and they're sleeping here, and isn't that fancy? But they're throughout human history, fairy tales, folk tales, legends have always spoke about, like, the wild people, the people of the forest, and every kind of culture they have stories like this. And I love that and they're never the same, but they do all have similar themes, and I love that the Gangrel sort of follow that tradition.
Exactly.
I also think that part of the reason why they don't put much stock in a single story as their origin is because of, who's going to remember a story that's accurate or a story well told. And as, like, story collectors as they are, and it being an oral tradition, one of those things is always going to be, I remember the story kind of like this. If they didn't witness it themselves, it's going to change a little bit. And that's just how oral histories end, or just continue reincarnating in these other ways. But just like any good story, it's the moral of the story that's most important.
Right. That's a great point. The idea that, like you said, from history class, you don't remember exactly the dates and times of when this thing happened, but you remember the story of how it happened. That's pretty good. I like that.
And I think it's kind of important to show how the Gangrel, they lay a higher importance on an oral tradition, whereas maybe the Ventrue or the Toreador, they're much more into a written tradition. those are clans who will like have books and books and books of here, this sire begat this child who begat that child, and so on and so forth. But the Gangrel don't have that. Like Ari said, it's much more about the moral lessons or even the survival lessons they're teaching in those stories. These are stories being told because they're trying to impart information in a way that is going to be remembered. And the oral tradition is the oldest one amongst humans and is still very common among those peoples the Gangrel like to hang out with.
And just like all the other major clans, unlike them, rather, the major clans, the Gangrel had little to nothing to do with human society or civilization. They sort of eschewed the firelight, if you will, for the wilderness, the dark places of the forests.
Yeah, they let the other clans meddle in all the human stuff. The Gangrel much more preferred hanging out with the barbarians that were just on the edges of empire, edges of civilization. My ancestors, yay barbarians! So you could see the Gangrel being as far out as the British Isles to the west and the steppes of Russia to the east, and they were down with the Bedouin tribes in the course of the Ashira. Wherever there's open space or freedom to wander, that's usually where you'll find the Gangrel. Scandinavia was a big place for the Gangrel to gather. They really thrived in those cold northern countries where it gets dark for long periods of time in 6 months out of the year, because these were not places where civilization moved very fast. And they created their own cultures there and drew off the fierceness of the people who actually did live there, and were able to use that as a point where they could go raid on the cities that the other more civilized vampires were starting to build up in the south. And that was kind of the Gangrel MO for a very long time.
Right, absolutely. Every time civilization slowly crept into their wild places, the Gangrel would just take to wandering. They had the ability to pick up and just travel the earth.
Well, yeah, and on top of that, because of their wildness, they developed their skill sets, and because of their disciplines and protein specifically, they could do whatever that was. That discipline specifically allowed them to always survive in no matter what kind of climate and civilization. So just allowed them a freedom. It bought them their freedom, and it continues to give it to them. But I think we'll talk about that specifically a little bit later.
But you're right, it did buy them that mutability that is Clan Gangrel did buy them their freedom, and allowed them to roam much further and farther and longer than most of the other vampire clans could, because they were so tied to the idea of the city, civilization. Without civilization, you ain't got no food. But unfortunately for the Gangrel, civilization just spread, and it kept spreading, and the Gangrel, while they took to wandering to find all the wilderness areas that they could go and hide at, they really kind of hit a wall when the Inquisition rose, because the Gangrel were so wild and so different and so out there. They were like a moving target for the Inquisition, and their wild nature just meant that the Inquisition was going to hit them first.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. The idea of, the people that were not of civilized society must be pagans. They're out there living in the wilds. And you're right. I mean, it's a target on the back. They're an easy pickings. It's like, oh, you've heard legends of a man that could turn into a wolf in the woods. Let's go rout him out.
Yeah, and particularly because the Gangrel are very close to their beast. So even if they aren't a wolf or a bat, they often will have things about them physically that mark them as being weird and bestial. Maybe they have pointy ears, or prominent fangs, or eyes that glow in the dark, or they have a tail, or there's something about them that's going to mark them as being bestial. And that's obvious. It's an obvious mark, and the Inquisition was going to be able to go look at that and say, look, that's a physical example of what we're trying to fight. Unlike most of the other clans who can look human, the Gangrel couldn't if they weren't careful. And so the Inquisition started just picking them off.
It's really easy to look at this and think of how the Gangrel possibly could have given rise to a lot of the fairy tales in the world of darkness. I mean, let alone, let's just forget about that there are actual fairies. You know, just by stories by a campfire or, the hearth in some home. Somebody with pointed ears wandering into town is going to be really weird. And even if you don't talk to the guy, he just passes through, they're going to create stories about this individual.
In ages past, you could get away with that sort of thing. But unfortunately now, humans were starting to fight back. I mean, it's not just the Inquisition, it's just about everybody else. They're like, oh, there's that weird monster that hangs on the edges of the village, lives out in the forest and picks off the little kids. Let's go get him. And suddenly,
right, angry mob and pitchfork.
It's the scene out of Beauty and the Beast, kill the
Absolutely.
beast. And for the Gangrel, this is the rock in the hard place that they're facing, because while they have for a long time had shunned vampiric civilization and vampiric society, they're being hunted down and they need protection.
Right, and then that brings them into contact with who?
The Camarilla.
That's right, the good old umbrella of love and friendship.
That warm embrace of the Ivory Tower.
Oh, yes, come into my cold arms and we'll take care of you.
I just wish you guys could see how hard my eyes are rolling. Because this is my idea when the Inquisition hit, and what probably a lot of Gangrel at that time were thinking when they were, because of how they practiced creation, a lot of them were just, I would imagine the sires were just like, well, I hope you make it, because if you make it, you're going to be a strong one. And just kind of like, by being seduced by the Ivory Tower, and it just kind of created this like nerf effect. I could kind of see during those dark ages where it's just kind of like, oh, well, you survived your first year while, we had joined this, Treaty of Thorns, and I could just, if I was playing a Dark Ages game, I know I would just be tearing somebody apart there and just being like, well, I survived it. I, developed myself. I have the skill sets to survive. But that's just me giving some shade.
It's how very Gangrel of you.
Just saying, I could do it.
I
Why
bet.
can't you?
Yeah.
Right. Well, with this, but like you said, it's, well, I can do it. Why can't you? It seems like there was a distrust and a tenuous truce at best between the Camarilla and the Gangrel. It was definitely a marriage of convenience. It was, the Gangrel were like, hey, we need somebody to watch our backs. The Camarilla were like, well, we need to organize all the vampires, so...
And the Gangrel had a lot to bring to the table for the Camarilla. Don't get that wrong, because while they may look down on the Gangrel as being mongrels and savages, the Gangrel had a lot of skill sets the Camarilla could use. They were skilled because they always lived on the edges. They were skilled as trackers. They were amazing warriors. They were great at guarding the borders. They're the people you wanted on the edges of society, because they're the ones who are going to make sure that the people you don't want in society don't get in. This created a relationship between the Gangrel and the other clans, for the most part, that worked fairly well, give or take. I mean, it was still tenuous, but it was a working relationship, at least till the modern nights. And then it wasn't working so much anymore.
That's right. In the modern nights, somehow this nervous relationship between the Gangrel and the Ivory Tower of the Camarilla just seemed to keep getting pulled just a little bit tauter and just a little bit more.
Yeah.
That tension just kept building up. As civilization continued to grow and encroach into the wild places, the Gangrel were like, hey, wait a minute. That's my forest, or that's my park.
Yeah, and they're the ones feeling the brunt of that loss. I mean,
Right.
And we see it just in the last 100 years. Like, cities have been growing and growing and growing. Like, Los Angeles is a prime example, because where we started with a few, like, towns all in close proximity to each other, it's now a mega city that is clear up to the mountains, around the mountains, over to the next county, and then that county, and then that county. And so all these wild places that the Gangrel would have been like, this is my territory, suddenly get turned into the San Fernando Valley, and there's houses there. And so they're the ones feeling the loss.
Well, it's also that, but also they're not the only ones in the forest.
Yep.
They share that forest, and I use that term very loosely, with werewolves.
Yes. They're the ones who have to put up with the werewolves, who are pissed as hell about this.
Like, the Gangrel are pretty upset about the shrinking wilderness, but not as angry as a werewolf is on an everyday level. Get a werewolf talking about how tiny the wilderness has gotten, and it's not a pretty sight.
Yeah.
Right. And then with that, so you've got, their nature on one end, who they are as a clan, as a group, as the Gangrel themselves. And then on the other hand, you've got their membership in the Camarilla with the politicking. And they keep saying, hey guys, why aren't you helping us out with this stuff? You, Mr. Ventru, you keep chopping down our trees to build your damn office buildings. He's like, how about some respect? Because we're the ones putting our lives on the line every night when we patrol the borders. We, keep the Sabbat off from your doorsteps.
Yeah, they're the ones who are the front line usually when, shit's coming down the pike. The Sabbat are coming in. The Anarchs are raising hell. Whatever the case, they're the ones who are the first line of defense. And I would be a little pissed off if I'm the one sticking my neck out and nobody's giving me any respect, and they're still taking my territory away from me. Like, what the fuck?
So with all of this, there was one thing that finally, the straw, it broke the camel's back, and it came in the form of a Gangrel elder named Xavier.
Yes.
Yeah, what happened there, Jen?
Well, no one really knows for sure. All we know is that this elder, Xavier, he went out to Eastern Europe, and he came back. And something spooked the crap out of him. And he went to the inner circle of the Camarilla in Venice, and no one really knows what he said to them. I mean, they don't know what the situation was. All they know is that he walked in, he said one sentence, and then he left. But when he left, he took the entirety of Clan Gangrel with him. And so the tenuous relationship between the Camarilla and the Gangrel finally broke. And the Gangrel just removed themselves from the Camarilla. And for the most part, for a lot of the last 20 years, most of the Gangrel have existed outside the Camarilla. There have been some who've stayed. Some of them didn't wish to leave, even when their brothers and sisters left. They just decided to stay. Others stayed because they actually have political cachet. There's at least one notable Gangrel prince in Milwaukee that was documented in the classic World of Darkness. But a lot left, and they didn't look back. They weren't sad to go. They didn't particularly align themselves with anyone. They just returned to being their wanderer selves.
Right, and I'm sure that did, caused both the Camarilla and the Sabbat at the time, and possibly the Anarchs, a little bit of, made them a little nervous because, well, wait a minute, here's this great clan of the Gangrel saying, no, we're not going to align ourselves with anybody, we're independent. And they're like, oh, okay, well, what's going now? And, what was it? Ironically, the place within the Camarilla for all that martial void that was left when they left is having to be filled by other newcomers that have the same sort of tenuous relationship with the Camarilla, as in the form of the Assamites. So it's like, well, heck, what do we do?
Yeah, the Assamites came in just as the Gangrel left. And by the by, they had a few people who were pretty skilled at some of the same things that the Gangrel were able to do. So, but this is where at this point is where things get a little murky, at least in White Wolf canon, because we have BNS by Night Studios and what they put out in their LARP book, but we also have V5, who has some other changes and additions that have gone on. So I want to make very clear at this point, right now, everything that we were discussing in terms of Clan Gangrel is mostly based off of the BNS canon. Now, when it's all said and done, like we said in our like little mini-sode, we will be discussing some of the changes that V5 is bringing into play. But for right now, according to By Night Studios, the Gangrel eventually, they wander for about 20 years doing their thing, and eventually then they came back. Xavier called everyone back again and said that there was something out there that spooked him. He was spookified.
Now this part really makes me grin, because in the history of the Gangrel, I don't know why, Jin, Ari, I don't know why, but for some reason they didn't like the Tremere.
I don't know why that is.
I don't know why either. But for some reason, the Tremere played an integral part in helping them come back in.
Yeah.
Which really makes me wonder exactly what it was Xavier found out and why he went to the Tremere for help.
I don't know. It's all weird.
It is. It's mysterious, and that's why I love it.
Yeah. Gangrel and Tremere have classically not gotten along. And there's a lot of reasons, which we will cover when we do get to Tremere. A lot of it involves wars 1,000 years ago that neither side has forgotten. And may or may not involve gargoyles. The Gangrel and Tremere never classically got along. And then all of a sudden Xavier's like, the Tremere got it right. We don't know what it is about. We have no idea. They're convinced that the Tremere are like on the up and up, and they know something, and suddenly now everybody's buddy, and it's not very clear why.
I'm just very confused as who did get along with Tremere ever.
No one.
Exactly. So to sit there and say it just was like,
yeah. You know,
I'm sure there was
a lot of faults.
Yeah,
there had to be some Toreador that got along.
You know, my best guess, and this is just me shooting in the dark, is the fact that at their hearts, the Gangrel and the Tremere are actually not completely dissimilar, and that these are clans that are all about survival, and they both have survivalist mentalities. So perhaps whatever Xavier found, whatever spookified him, he recognized that the Tremere are also being survivalists. We're probably the only other clan who would get it, but we don't know what that is.
Now, although that the Gangrel are back, the Ivory Tower said, okay, you guys can come back into the fold. The Ventrue and the Toreador, who never gave them much respect to begin with, were still hesitant to accept them back into their territories. So, you know, because, I mean, I don't know. They probably thought, well, here, they're going to either take our resources now, we got another mouth to feed, or they're going to come in, do their thing, and then leave again. So a lot of distrust.
Yeah, are they in or are they out? Are they in or are they out? They're like fucking cats. You know, they stand there at the door like, maybe I'll go out or maybe I won't.
See, there we go again. The cat's a Gangrel.
I know. But yeah, there is this deep sense amongst the Camarilla that the Gangrel can't be trusted. And certainly given the number of Gangrel who still remain independent, the feeling's kind of mutual. You know, the Gangrel were not rushing in droves to come running back to the loving arms of the Camarilla. And the Camarilla wasn't rushing to come bring them back into the folds. So there's a lot of suspicion, there's a lot of fear, and there's this kind of feeling like, well, the Gangrel, if we let them in, they could be the back door to our enemies, which that doesn't sound like politically relevant in this day and age or anything.
No. They're not the Kindred version of being hacked.
we hear that same thing on the news all the time right now in regards to some of the more political arguments going on. And that's the same idea the Camarilla has about the Gangrel. Like, you left, now you want to come back in, and we don't know who you've aligned with, we don't know where you've been, we don't know what enemies you could allow through the back door to possibly attack us.
Right, and there are a number of Gangrel who stayed independent. There are some that never left the Anarchs, and then there are even some still in the Sabbat.
And there's some who are autarkists. They just don't choose to hang with anybody. The Gangrel who did come back to the Camarilla, or who stayed in the Camarilla and never left, they kind of just have been stoic about it. They've just kind of put up with everyone's opinion. I mean, seriously, they have millennia of experience dealing with these kind of slights and insults and the so-called high clans that look down on them, and they know that when the chips are down and the kindred need protecting, that they're the ones who know what's lurking in the darkness, and they're the ones who can protect against it, and they're the ones who can stand there. So frankly, they don't really care whether the high clans look down on them, because they're the ones who know what's up.
Right, and whatever it is that Xavier foresaw, whatever's in the future, whatever's in the cards for the clan, only time will tell. All right, well, why don't we dive a little into their culture?
They're not a particularly organized clan, and they like it that way. I mean, you'll see some of the other clans are stupid highly organized, and the Gangrel are not one of those clans. They don't usually tend to give a lot of weight to the same things that other vampiric clans care about. So, trappings of rank and status and, who you owe and this, that, and the other, that's not as big of a concern with them as it would be, say, with a Tremere or a Ventru.
The status within the clan itself is, not completely different, but it is more ritualized. It's a little bit more tribal. You actually have rights by combat. Two warriors face off against one another to see who can come out on top, who's the strongest, who's the most capable, and you have to do it without weapons. The Gangrel actually have this sort of disdain for weapons because they feel they are the weapon.
I always look at the Gangrel practice kind of status within the clan in terms of rights. And I always kind of look at it like, you have your trial by combat, which is, two guys, or, it doesn't have to be guys. Remember, this is an equal opportunity clan, but you have two Gangrel fighting off against each other. Like, so I heard that you're the best fighter in Chicago, and I'm going to come in here, try to take you on. Let's see what you're made of. And yeah, they don't tend to fight with weapons, because they fight with the weapons that vampirism gave them. And whoever comes out on top, they get dibs. They get the right to gloat about this. It's my Midwestern upbringing understands this type of communication between people very well, because it's sort of like, so you think you're the big badass in town, huh? Let's go. Show me what you're made of.
Well, and that's another thing that they do, the boasting rights that they have. This kind of goes back to their tales of being explorers, storytellers, wanderers. It's like, who can say, who can tell the biggest feat, or, feat of strength or daring?
Who's got the biggest whopper?
Who's got the biggest whopper? Yeah, it's the pissing contest, but also it's kind of like who can tell the best story wrapped up in a boast, or a boast wrapped up in a story rather.
It's like Tormund in Game of Thrones with his story about fucking a bear, until someone calls bullshit on that, he's gonna run with it. So, and that's what the boasting right is. It's, you tell bigger and bigger whoppers, you tell big fish stories, and until someone calls bullshit on it and then asks for proof. And if you can't provide the proof, then you lose status in the eyes of everyone, because they're like, oh my god, you're such a bullshitter. But if if you provide the proof, then the challenger is like, that's what you get for being an asshole who doubts. It's like, it's a giant dick measuring contest is what it is. Or we should say genital measuring, because we want to keep it equal opportunity. But yeah, that's what
right.
it is.
That's right.
It is
equal opportunity.
Equal opportunity here. It is the show. It's showing off, and it's a very unique Gangrel thing, because the other clans, this is not how they rank themselves.
No, and it's one of those things where even in the books it said specifically, like, if you are someone who is to be speaking and listened to, or if you are someone who's to be listened. And I think that it's very important for that structure because of how, again, they embrace. It's so unique amongst the kindred that it has to be that way. But at the same time, you get to see, like, what you can aspire to.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like an example.
Yeah. That's true. It's one thing that the Gangrel are a clan that primarily learns by experience.
Yeah. And you do bring up a great point, Ari, in that you're right. This isn't just about, like, who can prove oneself better than another. There are those who are leaders and who have proven themselves leaders. And there are those who are wise and have proven themselves that way. So that's why they should be listened to. Because they obviously have information that can be passed down to the others. And until someone can prove otherwise.
Now, with the Gangrel being wanderers, they tend to not like to get together in large groups. But there are times when they do come together. And when they do, they're usually for specific reasons.
Yes. So there is this concept called the gather. And this is when you usually just call together all the Gangrel who are in a particular spot. And often they gather in the wilds. So it could be like a park or the outskirts of town, or like here in LA, we have these mountains and national forests like right on the edges of the city. So you could go hang out there. And what the whole purpose of the gather is you're swapping information. You're sharing gossip and stories. And if there's any clan business, that's usually where it gets taken care of. So this is kind of a way for them all to get all the members of the blood to get together and handle business. Rights are done during a gather. Hierarchy is established at a gather. And sometimes it can last, many nights. It can last several nights depending on how many rights they're doing and how many people there are and how much business has to be handled. Every so often, however, there is this thing called the Great Gather. And that's a bigger deal. Like, gathers are usually smaller groups of more local Gangrel. But if there's a big enough deal, if there's a big enough event, say an extremely powerful Gangrel comes into the area, or there's big news, say Xavier has decided to leave the sect again, then they will have these great gathers where they will get together as many Gangrel as possible in one area. And this is often just to discuss clan business at large. And usually this is pretty serious. If you're getting that many Gangrel together in one spot, I mean, first of all, they don't usually like to be all together in one spot. That's dangerous. So it has to be a big deal for them to get together in one area. And it usually has to be something that they all need to know about.
Right. Usually the greater gathers are hosted by one person. So definitely Xavier has enough pull that he could summon a great gather. However, I also would see that, like, a lot of his political rivals that are in Gangrel also kind of showing up, and then that would be like the Super Bowl Sunday, of like Gangrel. Because I would love to, like, read about that in canon a little bit, because he made a bunch of big waves, like, especially speaking for Clan Gangrel and not discussing it with any of the other higher, like, ranking Gangrels to just be like, we're out. That was a pretty big deal. and there was no gatherer talked about that. So that was something that kind of was like, there's a, like, Gangrel likes to play fast and loose, but that might have been off the rail for even
A
then.
little too fast, a little too loose. Yeah, I would love to see a Great Gather where I could have nachos. Just watch that shit go down. That'd be amazing.
What do you think the ghouls do? I mean, they just kind of like, hey, yeah, sit back. You're gonna want to get some popcorn.
That's if the Gangrel have ghouls, John.
Hey, I thought everybody had ghouls.
Well, so they don't always ghoul humans, but we'll get into that later. So the other big thing for the Gangrel is they have what is called the Revel. And the Revel is the big call to battle for all the local Gangrel. And it's usually in conjunction with some hunting party the Camarilla is doing. Not always, but usually. So the Gangrel could call a revel amongst themselves to hunt down someone who's wanted by the prince. And the prince has called for justice on them. So they can get a group of themselves together and go hunt down whoever the prince wants hunted down. Or they can get a revel together to hunt down a group of outsiders who have been threatening the domain or threatening their territory. Or perhaps there's someone who's wronged the clan and fuck that guy. We need to go fuck his shit up. So they'll call a revel to go, fight that guy. Or, maybe there's a lupine that has crossed their path somewhere. That's what revels are for. They're hunting parties. And every so often, they will call a grand revel, and just like the Great Gathers, a grand revel is usually a big fucking deal, and that's when the entire clan is called to war. The entire clan is called to war, and they're called to war against a common enemy. Can you imagine this? This would be fucking amazing! Because in the modern nights, this is super rare, but in the Middle Ages, this shit was happening a lot. And it was not unheard of for Clan Gangrel to go to war against many supernaturals, lupines, vampires. This is part of the history between the Tremere and the Gangrel, is the fact that they were at war with each other when the Tremere were still mages. I mean, can you imagine all of Clan Gangrel declaring war on you? That would be so... I would just die. I'd be like, just kill me now. I'd be scared shitless.
Well, yeah, especially in those, especially in the Dark Ages, where you didn't have fast transportation, where you didn't have fast communication, you didn't have the ability to go out there and see the field before you. Gangrel can.
Yeah.
We can just transform into bats, just a swarm of bats. Are you going to really, look at those bats and go, that's like 300 Gangrel coming at me? Nuh-uh. You're not going to think that. It's just bats in the night sky. Yeah. You did not want to mess with Gangrel, during those Dark Ages.
The werewolves part, the lupines, that it's kind of like, I'd say that's kind of toe-to-toe, but I would love to see, the mage, like that Tremere and Gangrel war would be incredible. It's like you've got these hoity-toity mages that think that, oh, my magic can solve anything, and you've got these cunning-ass Gangrel that are like, oh yeah, fireball this.
Yeah, and when we get into Clan Tremere, we'll tell a lot more about this history, because it was nasty. It was nasty. And I would not want to be on the other side of a grand revel. That would be bad news.
Absolutely. But even then, we could talk about, other Gangrel that had, the really big, enormous, revels, where we have, Dabrul the Brave, the founder of the Anda, the bloodline of Gangrel, that were just, part of the, Hun army, the Mongol army that just came across and just destroyed Europe. That's still one of the most epic things about, Gangrel history.
Yeah. The Gangrel, if there was barbarians who were riding, the Gangrel were with them, and they rode with the Huns, they rode with the Mongols, and they were just destroying shit up. This is why you don't piss off the Gangrel. And I think that's very hard for the Camarilla sometimes to remember, because they're so busy looking down on the Gangrel. they're those weird outliers. They're this clan that just hangs on the edges, and really, what harm can they be? You piss them off bad enough, you can find out just how terrifying the gangrel can be.
Right, and both of those, the Grand Gather, Grand Revel, even just a regular gather and revel, it's something that if you don't know, like if you are one of those hoity-toity clans and you look down on them and you don't take the time to get to know their customs, if you will, you could be pretty much on the receiving end of some of that wrath, because when they do gather, because they don't get together often, but when they do, it's not always a good thing. In fact, it's majority of the time it's not a good thing, because Gangrel are happiest when they don't get to see people very often.
Yeah, these aren't Apple events where we're all getting together and revealing the new toy. No, this is not a good thing.
Right. When the wise prince would remember that if there are a lot of Gangrel gathering within their city, be very worried.
Yeah. If you see the Gangrel amassing on the horizon, you better batten down the hatches.
Absolutely.
Shit's gonna get real.
Well, just like as we discussed, the clan has a very loose structure, and they're not very formal as a clan. They are also very laissez-faire when it comes to embracing childer. In fact, this goes right back to what Ari, I think you mentioned, that it's just all about survival. I mean, we've all mentioned it, but you know what I mean.
So what I absolutely love about their embrace tactics is that it's brilliance, honestly, because it instills everything that the clan has always been about, and it does it in such a instinctual way. Most vampires in this genre, you are groomed, there is some idea of who you are, and the Gangrel just kind of go, that guy looks pretty strong. I wonder how he would do with this problem of vampirism. So let's embrace him, dump him off in the middle of nowhere, and see if he can survive one winter without me.
At their heart, the Gangrel are survivalists. That's who and what they are. So they want to embrace people who can prove they too can survive.
Right, it strengthens the clan.
Yeah. It strengthens the clan as a whole. And, it's always a gamble, because you can embrace a person thinking, yeah, this person's going to be great. This is the type of survivalist we need. If they can't survive a winter on their own without you, then they're not strengthening the clan. And if they get killed, well, they were weak.
That's right. I mean, it could be anybody that they're looking for, from the survivalist to the naturalist to an outdoors person, campers, hikers, environmental, justice warriors, anybody that shows grit and cunning to fight to stay alive or fight for the wilderness, things that the Gangrel respect.
Yeah. And often they'll scope out someone for a little bit. They will kind of watch and see, is that person worthwhile? And if they are interested in them, they will hunt them down. And if they are fighting, if the Gangrel are hunting you down and you're fighting that, then they're like, oh yeah, you're getting embraced. Because they want fighters. They want survivors. They want people who aren't going to just lay down flat on their back and just take it.
Absolutely. The idea of someone who wants to fight to live means that they could probably endure, immortality as well. Because I feel that the Gangrel are one of the more if you can survive all the loneliness, because that's one of the things is that Gangrel love to be alone. And that's also a vital thing. Will you fight to survive, from, the world damage, but also the psychological damage,
yeah.
I think.
And there is a lot of psychological damage. I mean, I don't think many people think about that, but I mean, just being a vampire is psychologically damaging, because you are being, just as a vampire, you're being separated from human society, but as a Gangrel, it's even more so. because you're being separated from a lot of civilization, because what they'll do is they'll embrace you and they'll dump you somewhere and say best of luck. So that's a lot of shit to get through mentally to just survive.
I think that's fantastic, though, for, like, it also, again, goes back to their nature. It's the idea that, can you make it? Survival of the fittest. And in this case, it could be either. I mean, you could just be a really smart gangrel or a fledgling that, happens to know how to do it. You could be just a very strong, like physically strong gangrel fledgling. And what was that? Ari, expand on that a little bit about, you said surviving a winter. How does that go down?
Well, specifically during the Dark Ages, Gangrel would embrace and just kind of leave their offspring out. And a lot of offspring didn't even make it the first night because they didn't know, hey, sunlight's going to kill me. I didn't seek out shelter. Or that they just fell into the beast and frenzy so hard that they never came out of it to, survive the night. So if you could survive the first night by yourself and the first week and make it out a year, eventually your sire or someone will fall upon you of the Gangrel clan and ask you, how many winters? And if you don't know the answer and you can go maybe one, they will then kind of like adopt you and start teaching you the ways. So that was what I always thought was a very, kind almost of the Gangrel, where they would adopt their own strays. Because this is how the clan does embrace, where it's just kind of like, if you can survive a year, you're in. And you're a card-carrying member at that point. And I always really loved that part, because now the clan is your sire. You don't have a specific one. Maybe you do actually get to meet the person who turned you, but you typically don't you don't like that person anyway. I mean, they cursed you and they set you off on your own as a babe in the woods. But now everyone's your family. And I was like, maybe I romanticize that a little bit, but I've always really enjoyed that part.
Well, and I'm sure with time, the Gangrel fledgling who makes it they might romanticize it in their own memory. Just, part of that story that they can tell about how they came about. Now, with most clans, the fledglings are presented to the court, like a coming out sort of thing. How does this work in Gangrel society?
Well, with Gangrel, I mean, like Ari said, you have to survive a winter before they'll even take you in. So, they're not going to take you to a court till they feel you're ready. And that's actually not uncommon. Most clans will often do that, but for the Gangrel, it's really, that's a big deal for them to present a child to the court, because this means that child has survived, that the entire clan has accepted them. And so if the sire is interested in bringing them to the court for recognition, then they can do it when they're ready. But they're not going to do it before that Gangrel has been completely informed on the ways of the Camarilla. Because remember, they've been embraced and dumped and have had to survive for a year or for a winter. And once, if they've proven to do that, they still don't know anything about the Camarilla. They've just managed to survive and not get killed. So no Gangrel's going to bring a new fledgling into a Camarilla court without having explained to them, okay, this is kind of how the folks that think there are betters run things. Because that would just be foolish. And consequently, you will run across those Gangrel who are just really well versed on Camarilla etiquette for a clan that is looked down upon. Because someone has to be the lore keeper. Someone has to be the one who's training up the the fledglings or the wandering gangrel who, they never found their sires, but they've managed to survive this long. They have to be the ones who are keeping an eye out on all those gangrel, because that's knowledge, and that's knowledge that you can use to survive.
Right, exactly. And those lore keepers, they're the ones that help some of the fledglings, how not to piss off the court.
Yeah. I mean, even if that gangrel doesn't stay in the Camarilla, it's the fact that if they're going to go and wander into a Camarilla city, they're not going in, completely unarmed, as it were.
Well, also, it's just survivability in the wild is one thing. Survivability in a political realm, some of the gangrel do really well at that as well. Again, this gangrel is all about evolution in my mind. So a lot of them specialize specifically in the, surviving the outside world, but the political arena. There is going to be some stand-up gangrel as well, because the gangrel needed it. So they're going to embrace some that are like that. But I also think that there's a lot of gangrel out there that don't even know that they're gangrel. They've been mistaken as caitiff, because no one's ever been able to identify them as gangrel. So a lot of caitiffs out there that aren't going to be presented to the prince are running around as well. So they're already skidding and hiding and waiting for the scourge to find them one day.
Yeah, and you just brought up a great point, because outside of the Bruja, the gangrel are perhaps the clan that is the most responsible for unacknowledged caitiff. And by caitiff, we mean vampires who they don't know what they are. They just know they're vampires. So they've never met their sire, or they don't remember their sire, or their sire didn't say anything. So they don't know what they are. And, the gangrel are responsible for many caitiffs. And sometimes it's because the sire just never came back, or the sire died, or what have you. Maybe the child wandered off. Who knows? There's lots of reasons.
Now, with the gangrel's tendency to wander unaccompanied throughout the world in the early days of their embrace, this goes to with what you said earlier, Jen, about them being the most mutable, the most changeable. Have we discussed the idea of bloodlines in our other clans?
We've discussed bloodlines pretty early on in the podcast, but not with the other clans, because frankly, gangrel are the one clan that has the most bloodlines. So what a bloodline is you are kind of like a distaff branch. You're an offshoot from a clan major, and that just means that you share some traits with a clan major, but the rest of your traits may be different. And because the gangrel are so mutable, so changeable, they have a lot of different bloodlines, because they've had to adapt to a lot of different situations. So consequently, you'll find gangrel who suddenly became that bloodline over there, or this one over there. And there's lots of variants. There are many different variants of gangrel. There's at least 5 known variants of just the main clan. Excuse me. There's 5 known variants of just the main clan of gangrel, and then there's 5 known bloodlines that people know trace back to gangrel. And there's new ones appearing all the time.
Right, yeah. The crazy thing with the gangrel bloodlines is you have, it's not just about running around in the woods. You got the mariners who see the high seas as their wilderness. And then with the modern times, you've seen the rise of what used to be termed city gangrel, or coyotes, that see the cities and civilization as their hunting grounds, their wilderness.
Exactly. And given the tenuous nature gangrel have with any sort of civilization, they don't particularly tend to be hidebound to any particular one culture or blood or discipline like a lot of the other clans. And that's very useful to them, because this mutability allows them to pretty much go anywhere and live through anything. Like you mentioned, the mariner gangrel. I mean, these are gangrel who managed to make it on the high seas. There are, the city gangrel who see the city as being their wilderness, and so they treat it as such. So yeah, and there's more than just that. There's a lot of different variations on the gangrel, and it all comes down to survivability for them.
Now, Ari, you brought this up before. In terms of disciplines, the Gangrel across the board share one very specific discipline. I think they're the only clan that actually has it. That sort of is an outward expression of their ever-changing nature.
It's their ever-changing nature, and it's also a lot of their beast. They're so in tune with just what is inside of them, and that nagging, you will survive, you're going to overcome this. Like, the beast is not their saboteur. They don't view it as that. And a lot of, and that I think is expressed in Protein specifically. And it allows them to survive primordial things in my mind. Because I could just imagine myself playing a gangrel who is, hunting the hunter-gatherers, the nomads of early civilization. And it comes down to that their very first power in Protein is going to be, Eyes of the Beast. It allows you to see in the darkness, in near complete pitch blackness. And everything has to do with melding in animal, traits and putting them into the human mind and body, and being able to go out there and use your vampiric power. And this is completely which allows Gangrel to go out there and forge their own freedom and survival independently of even humanity as a species. They can go out there and go years without talking to a human being, and it has everything to do with their ability with Protein.
So Protean, for those of you who haven't read up on the discipline, Protean itself speaks to the changeability of anything. So Protean is a discipline that allows a vampire to shift its form. They can shift from human looking to beast looking to mist looking like mist. And this, like you said, Ari, it does tap into that primal nature of the gangrel and allows them to survive in crazy situations, absolutely crazy situations. And I've always thought Protean much less as a discipline in the strictest sense than as a way of sort of manipulating the quote-unquote magics of vampiric blood. Because obviously vampiric blood isn't normal. There's something about it that keeps a vampire in this weird stasis state. And Gangrel have somehow, whatever it is about Gangrel, they've been able to naturally tap into that. So that allows them to touch the one thing that other vampires fear, and that's their beast. And they're able to touch it in a way that allows them to manipulate themselves. So, because of that, the Gangrel, they embrace that part of themselves that most other vampires shun. And that grounding in the knowledge of who they are and what they are allows them that ability to shift as they need and as the situation calls for, because they're aware of what they are and they roll with that in whatever situation they find themselves in.
Right. Protean is the one thing, like you said, Ari, also that it allows the Gangrel to take on any form that can help them survive. And this always makes me think of, like you said, way back when. It's sort of the idea of the old animus the shaman, the idea that things in nature will protect you. You can draw strength from nature. You're able to meld with the ground so the sun can't hurt you. You can see in the dark like a wolf or big cat. It's just the ultimate survival tool that it makes them the like you said, the ultimate survivalist. It seems to be the one constant recurring theme for the entire clan.
There's also something else that I always kind of like held as part of the philosophy of what Gangrel represents. And as much as I view most vampire clans as kind of like what humanity, like the extremes of humanity. And I always felt that Gangrel stepped aside from that in it being much more early human, where we're constantly moving. They're nomadic. They are orally traditional. That's how they pass their stories on, and that's how you prove yourself is through your great acts. And if you can do great things and earn respect, you can lead the people. And I feel that this is represented throughout every aspect of Clan Gangrel, even including to their weakness now in modern time, where it's kind of like most of the clans are doing much better because of they are able to change in their mentality, whereas Gangrel's kind of stuck in their ways because it's worked for so long. It's only been in the last 200 years that it's really been difficult for them. And that's where I believe that a lot of that philosophy is with this clan specifically. But it's just a personal feeling about that.
Absolutely. And however, as wonderful as Protean is in helping with their survival, much like everything else in the world of darkness, it has a dark side that what gives them their ability to survive can also be very dangerous.
Yeah, the older they get, and the more powerful and advanced they get in Protean, it can be harder and harder to control. And vampires have been known to get stuck in one particular form or the other without the ability to shift out. So you could just get stuck as a wolf or a bat or as mist. And sometimes those changes can happen randomly without your control. And so this discipline is unique to the Gangrel and all their bloodline who display it, but it's a definitely dangerous one. And it is one that they can teach outside of the clan. And if you find a Gangrel who's willing to teach it to you, kudos. You as a Brujah can learn Protean. You as a Toreador can learn Protean. But again, it's a very dangerous discipline to learn. And the Gangrel have adapted it in ways that other clans, even in learning it, they're just never going to be as skilled at it as the Gangrel will.
I gotta say that thinking about the possibility of random shapeshifting does not appeal to me.
No, it's good. It'll be like something bad out of Harry Potter or something.
Yeah, the animagus that went wrong.
The animagus who went wrong, just changing shapes all of a sudden. Nah, not my thing. I mean, imagine being stuck as mist and you couldn't change before sunlight, and hope to God you can hit the ground. I mean, you'd be so screwed.
Well, especially since most of the time you have to rely on a breeze on top of that because you move so slowly.
Yeah. I mean,
you could just go crazy just floating there.
That would suck.
That would suck.
But you can still talk, so you just be like this screaming mist that wants to live.
Oh my God, it's the glow cloud.
Oh God, that's so that's not creepy or anything. Thanks.
All hail the glow cloud. All hail. Okay. So the Gangrel are survivors who like to flirt on the edges of what is to be civilized, what it means to be civilized. So consequently, they aren't as deep into human culture as some other vampires, and the older Gangrel tend to be less so. So this can lead to a lot of social problems.
Yeah, you'll find a lot of older Gangrel. You're talking Arya about being set in their ways. Yeah, a lot of older Gangrel can be anachronistic. They have a hard time grasping modern technologies like cell phones or computers or tablets. And even if they do understand them, they just may not care. They don't care. Why do I have to care about a cell phone when this is the way I've been doing it for the last 400 years and it worked just fine for me? So
That's right. But weapons, on the other hand, tend to be an exception because, stick them at the pointy end. Okay, I get that.
yeah, I mean, sure, weapons don't change as much, but frankly, if you can find a better way to kill someone, a Gangrel's probably going to pick it up. A gun's not that hard to figure out.
And also, human influence is not something that they really delve too deeply into unless it's very specific areas.
Yeah, Gangrels, it's not that they don't have human influence. Some of them do build human influences. They can build human influences amongst wanderers or nomadic tribes or, homeless people or hobos or a lot of them who, because they are a survivalist mentality, a lot of them tend to have military backgrounds. So you'll see several of them who may be tied into the military or into these black ops groups or even into veterans groups. So they'll be tied into like the forestry service or park service because those are people who are protecting the areas the Gangrel like to be in. So it's not like they aren't tied into humans, but they're not tied in quite the way, say, a Venturer or a Toreador would be, where it's like, I'm into all the human business. Usually they're very specific in how they choose their human interactions.
Right, and also resources tend to be scarce with the Gangrel because money is just sort of another tool. It's not something that they strive to, for unless maybe the Coyotes, the city Gangrel, because they might view that as something they need to survive the urban jungle.
See, with the city Gangrel, that's a completely different mentality because they are almost exclusively Savant, and if they do wander into the Camarilla somehow, they are never trusted by anybody. Because the city Gangrel might use that money and try to lure like a hooker to like feed on her or something like that. They'll do something devious with money. It's just another tool to exact some kind of evil.
Yeah, but Gangrel who tend to be in the more civilized areas, whether they're city Gangrel or not, it's all the same. Money's just a tool for them. It's a tool for survival. Whether it's to get the hooker at the corner so I can feed off of her, or whether it's to pay for that shady flop house that I call my haven, because it's a place where I can stay for a night. It's all about survival with them. It's not about the amassing of influence for influence's sake or for power's sake. I have influences because I want to survive, and I will do whatever it takes to survive. And maybe that does require power. Maybe that does require political influence. But at the heart of it all is always survival.
They're very pragmatic,
They are. Even with things like herds, contacts, allies, they tend to cultivate things that are very useful to them. I'm also noticing a theme of not just survivability, but it tends to be also personal survivability.
Yeah, they're not thinking about taking anyone with them. It's very much just, it's me. If you can't take care of yourself, what are you doing?
Also, those contacts and allies, they tend to be those same people that you could cultivate those influences with. Ex-military, survivalists, campers, people who tend to be on the fringes of society. They can be quite useful too. Okay, so no, I'm just laughing because Jen, you always put these wonderful all caps sort of.
Yes. So I put these all caps in there because this is the emphasis I want to place on this. It is so. We've gone through all of this. We've kind of explained to you what's up with Clan Gangrel, and now you're like, oh my god, I've always wanted to play Bear Grylls. I want to be that survivor who gets out there in the woods with nothing but a knife and a toothpick, and I hope I make it out alive. How do I play one
so
of
if you've
those?
always wanted to be Bear Grylls and do the knife and MacGyver toothpick trick, that means this clan's probably for you.
Yes, this is the clan for those of you who like playing the lone survivors. The MacGyvers, if you will. I liked your MacGyver reference there. I'm like, oh my god, MacGyver would
Totally
totally be a Gangrel.
He traveled around.
Yeah. But if you're the loner kid who hangs out in the back of the class, or the tree hugging like environmentalist, or the granola eater who likes to wear too much flannel, or the weekend warrior who likes to do their like super light backpack hiking up in the mountains, this is the clan for you. The Gangrel are as diverse as they come. Literally, they don't particularly care what, race, creed, nationality, gender, sexuality, none of that matters to them. The only thing they care about is surviving and continuing. So, can you survive? Will you survive? That's what matters to a Gangrel. So they can be rather choosy on who they embrace, and they're not going to just waste time and effort on just anyone. But if you are someone that they feel can make it, you're the type they will want. So they want to bring across those who have the gift to thrive, especially in harsh conditions, especially on their own, especially without guidance. For all of you who are loners who don't like people to like handhold you, this is the clan for you. They often prefer those who have an ability to make it in any conditions with very little support. So this can include anyone. Homeless, ex-cops, ex-military, long-haul trekkers, survivalists, gang members. A lot of different kinds of people can call themselves Gangrel. They do tend to be looked down upon by other so-called high clans for their lack in social graces, but I will say that is not always universally true about the Gangrel. There are many Gangrel who are very socially acceptable and who have pleasant manners, who are good politically and socially. They're not just like, hairy thugs who have, no concept of social niceties. There's lots of Gangrel who are very appropriate, sociable, polite people. Beckett is a famous member of Clan Gangrel who is amongst this group.
He is one of my absolute favorite characters.
Many people love Beckett. Gangrel, really at the end of the day, they just want to make a place for themselves among the sharks that they have to put up with. And if that means they have to clean themselves up and make themselves look nice, they will, and they can. So you don't always just have to be like the mountain man coming down in your bear skins with your giant, axe into court. You can be a very cleaned up, prim and proper vampire if you choose to be.
Right, and those Gangrel that do spend time in Camarilla courts and they do consider themselves members, they often work out a compromise with the muckety mucks of the court to do those things that are on the fringes of the domain. They can act as spies, they can do patrols, bodyguards, defending anything that is the domain's interest that, say, the Gangrel and Toreador again, or the Ventru and the Toreador, that they kind of, no, I don't have time for that. Let the Gangrel do it. And they find acceptance that way.
Exactly. And this is a note for any of you out there who are interested in playing Gangrel. Not every city accepts Gangrel. Not every city accepted Gangrel back into the fold. Because of the ones that left, many princes are still pretty suspicious of them. So those Gangrel who were not lucky enough to be back in a domain, they just often live outside of the domain and hang either with the Anarchs or the Independents or Autarchus or whatever. Mind their own business. And so just as you're thinking about this clan and your characters, just double check with the domain that you're playing with, because they may actually not allow Gangrel into the game, because the prince has an edict against the Gangrel. That's not to say you can't play a Gangrel. You just have to be sneaky about it. But you always clear it with your storytelling team, whoever your storyteller is.
Absolutely. Now, Ari, before we move on to the fun concepts portion, is there anything else you want to add to the culture of the Gangrel that you've observed?
I've always really loved the fact that, again, the Gangrel are storytellers at heart. They want to know everything. And Beckett's one of those really famous ones. Like, he goes out there and he wants to find out what the true story is. And that's another part of Gangrel, is that they are so passionate about specific things. That's why they seek out solitude so hard, is because they're on a personal mission half of the time. They want to find something. And for Beckett, it's finding out things about Cain. He's a very known nodist. And, he's not the only scholar out there who's doing all the digging up. And I feel like there's a lot more Gangrel out there who are doing something similar, where they're trying to excavate histories that they've heard about. They want to prove stories right or wrong. I mean, I would love to hear, someone going out there trying to disprove a story. And that's part of their personal plot. That'd be great to play, I think.
So, Gangrel Indiana Jones, which would be a lot of fun.
Oh.
Wouldn't that?
That's right up my alley.
Gangrel archaeologist.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, future game concept. Yeah, a Gangrel historian. Someone who goes around collecting the oral histories. Yeah. You can have Gangrel scholars. I would love to see more Gangrel scholars. But that's just my personal bias.
Well, I really like the idea of that duality of just kind of like, here's this rugged person who's gonna go out there and actually bring back the goods.
Yeah.
And just be like, I did that. What did you do?
Yeah.
I find that very satisfying.
That's a great concept.
Well, speaking of concept, this is the portion of our clan episodes where we talk about those concepts to give the the players sort of a few ideas, some things to mull over to possibly play as a Gangrel.
Yeah, so we just listed a few in our notes. There's the classic one is the outsider survivalist. That this is the oldie but a goodie with the Gangrel. This is the person who lives on the edge of society. They got a Bowie knife in their wits. That's it. And for those of you who are like, I just want to dip my toes into Clan Gangrel, that's a classic is there's nothing wrong with playing the classic. But we have some others. There's always the ex-cop, military spy, someone who's involved in that milieu, who's had some sort of extensive, field ops training. Often they've had extensive weapons training. By their nature, they've just been trained to be survivors. That's not uncommon amongst Gangrel.
Right. They also tend to be pretty good looking.
They do tend to be very good looking if you believe all the movies.
That's right.
So, if you believe all the movies, they're pretty hot. But, maybe they're not. I don't know. Whatever you want to whirl with. These are the people who are used to working in rough terrain and fighting the good fight. And this can be attractive to Gangrel. Those are the type they tend to usually look for.
Yeah, and we've already mentioned, the weekend warrior. Those guys that like to hop on their bike with, their pack and go camping.
Glamping is what I do,
John.
Oh,
so, right. Well, you could still be a Gangrel. You're scrappy.
I would be a horrible Gangrel. I'd be a Beckett Gangrel. That's what I would be.
Hey, that's fine. It takes all kinds. And you got the wayward camper. Those, that one guy that was like, oh, I'm going to go up on that mountain and pitch a tent, and then he just never came home.
Yeah, the teenagers who go up in the woods and one of them gets lost and is never seen ever again.
Yep.
Gee, wonder what happened to them, except, 10 years later, they're wandering around the city of Gangrel. So, that's a concept. Environmental scientists. So anybody who's doing any like environmental work, or even archaeologists. Archaeologists can kind of fall into this category too. Of anyone who's outside doing a lot of work, you have whether you're saving the trees or you're looking for the Ark of the Covenant, there's this aspect of survivability and having to deal with tough situations that is very attractive to a gangrel.
Right, and then the friend to man or beast alike. This would be one of those things like you could see the gangrel mariner being part of Greenpeace.
Well, I mean, these are the people who get along more with animals than with people. So a friend of man and beast alike. You get along with dogs,
like nature preserves or something like that.
Yeah,
I
the nature
would
preserves.
imagine.
Yeah.
Or like the wild animal shelters that they have, where they have like the big cat, where these rich millionaires dump their tigers when the tigers get a little too scary for them.
Yeah.
I could imagine that.
Well, you could still have an eco-terrorist gangrel.
You could have an eco-terrorist gangrel. Yeah, that'd be a cool concept.
Yeah.
There are those who came before, and these are the people who existed in the land before civilization ever came. So maybe you're part of the Mongol hordes, or you're a Viking raider, or you're a Cossack, or you're a Berber of North Africa, or you're a member of the Sioux tribe of the Midwestern Plains. Whatever the case, your people were there until civilization showed up. And you are part of that tradition that came before. So you recall a time before there was ever European-style civilization, and you're not necessarily completely comfortable with the Camarilla.
And then we've talked about this before with the coyote/city gangrel, the urban jungle.
Yeah, those who, and you don't necessarily have to be a Sabbat gangrel to be a gangrel in the city. You see the city just as sort of another territory you have to survive. It could be you grew up on the mean streets. You are a smart-talking, tough-as-nails person who's had to deal with all the shit going on all around you, like Jessica Jones style. You can be a gangrel who survives that way.
Right, absolutely.
And you can also be a traveling rogue. You can be one of those people who just moves from town to town. You shake the dust of the road off your feet, and you're just collecting stories and having adventures. And, after a while, maybe you move on to another town. You could be that person who just listens to like new faces, or new music. You're a musician who goes to a different club every night, or you're just whatever it is. You're just passing through, and you're picking up pieces of culture along the way as you do it. But those are just a few concepts. There's lots of other different variants. The key, I think, for the gangrel is you have to have the ability to survive, to adapt to change, and not be completely comfortable with civilization as it is.
There's also, as someone who's played a lot of the bloodlines in this clan, I just want to be the first person to be telling you that there's no real wrong way to play a gangrel. I think that there's no real rules. There's just general concept of these are the main ideas behind this clan, and there is no right or wrong because there is that flexibility there. And you already have your opponent. Your opponent is civilization. You have you have your oppressor, and how are you going to fight it? And what's even better is that you have to be strong. And if you are not strong, that means you're weak and you will just fade into the background. So that's what I do enjoy as the challenge for the character concepts with this. One of the character concepts that I've always wanted to play was the revenge child. So that you were created not because you were supposed to survive. You were created because you were actually made as punishment. They wanted to see you die, and you survived. And that was always one of those concepts that I think is very rare. But I feel like if you are a really good player, you can just really dive into that. And it's such a crazy personal plot that's away from their survivalist portion, but now you're on a revenge path, which is completely divergent from the clan. I don't know. I wanted to throw that out there.
It's a great concept.
Yeah, thanks.
It's a great concept.
Definitely.
A great point of perspective to have. So now we get into like one of my favorite areas, which is pop cultural references, because I don't know about you guys, but sometimes pop culture gives me lots of reference points for like how to approach a clan, even if it's not exactly the same. So yeah. I know for me with the Gangrel, pretty much every action movie ever fits for Clan Gangrel. Bruce Willis and Die Hard. Yeah.
Yeah, even Predator,
Predator.
Oh,
Rambo.
Absolutely.
Alien.
And speaking with like Beckett, Tomb Raider, Indiana Jones.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Pretty much any action film ever known to man.
And then there's Vikings, one of my favorites.
Yeah, Vikings is an amazing show. If you haven't watched it, go watch that show.
Because, Vikings.
It's Vikings.
Yeah.
Even my historian self doesn't get too upset at the discrepancies there. It's a good show. If you're like really into like seeing how a culture shifts and changes and adapts to civilization, going from being the barbarians on the outside to adapting to the quote-unquote civilization, Vikings is a must-watch, because it really can show you how the Gangrel have kind of evolved with that. And if you're interested in playing a Gangrel who is of the Scandinavian areas, go watch Vikings. It will teach you a lot of mostly okay Viking history in a very short amount of time. Watch anything that involves a barbarian group attacking another barbarian group. I put, Game of Thrones in our notes. We bring it up at left, right, and
every time.
Every time, because they really have a lot of archetypes we can just pillage for vampire games. But it doesn't have to be that show. It can be any movie or show or story that involves groups. The Mongolian hordes, or the Huns, or the Dothraki, or the Wildlings, or the Iron Islanders, or pirates. It can be Pirates of the Caribbean. Whatever. You have a group of outsiders who are on the edges of civilization doing their thing, and they keep coming into contact and clashing with said civilization. Any movie, TV show, book that portrays that, you'll be pretty spot on with. I put Deliverance in here because I feel like that is the epitome of the weekend warrior type. If you want to see how a weekend warrior could possibly make it as a Gangrel, watch Deliverance. I mean,
oh yeah, especially with any type of weekend warrior, because that movie shows like 3 different city guys going out into the hills, them folk, and yeah, exactly. It's like how are they going to survive in this wilderness that they know nothing about, but they think we know what we're talking about, right, guys? Yeah, we got this.
Yeah, and it really kind of gets at that survivalist mentality of, can you be a city person who survives in a really shitty situation?
Absolutely.
So, any survivalist show on TLC or Nat Geo, they have all sorts. There's, I feel like 4 or 5 of them. You could watch those. Pretty much any Animal Planet show. I'm just making the argument Steve Irwin probably would have made a good Gangrel.
Absolutely. Oh yeah,
Absolutely.
He could talk to any animal.
I'm throwing that out there. I mean, I believe that in my heart and soul. And, pretty much any documentary on the History Channel about the rise and fall of any civilization. I am partial myself to Barbarians 2, and the Dark Ages. Those are my particular 3 favorite History Channel ones. I may or may not own those because they directly relate to my field of history. But, Mongols, Huns, you name it, the Berbers, any group that has been one of those groups that has come in screaming in to tear apart some civilization somewhere. Yeah, you can. Those are all good places to look. Any other ones, Arya?
I think you nailed a lot of great ones. I'm not so good with the pop culture, unfortunately, so I'm so thankful you're really great at it.
I seem to have a large milieu to pull from. I did grow up with mostly boys who like to watch lots of action films. So, like Rambo and Apocalypse Now were vividly in my childhood. So I'm like, oh, those are great Gangrel movies. So, but in terms of books to read, of course we say every time with the clans, go read your clan books.
Right, Clan Books 1, Clan Books Revised, Gangrel Revised. It's actually a really good read. That's right. We have Wolves of the Sea. This is that Scandinavian Gangrel Viking, if you really want to get in deep with that history, that's the book for you.
Yes, go read Wolves of the Sea. Great book. Lore of the Clans, that has a lot on the Gangrel. And Libellus Sanguinis 3, which is Wolves at the Door. It covers the medieval Gangrel clan and the threat they pose to the stability of Christian medieval Europe. And this also includes what I alluded to earlier, their long, bloody, nasty war that they had with these weird mages called the Tremere. So there's a lot in there about the conflicts between the Gangrel and the Tremere. And it's a lot of fun to read.
Oh yeah, go Team Pyramid.
Go Team Pyramid. So yeah, those are just some great books to read. If you want to learn more on Beckett's in a lot of interesting places. He apparently has a jihad diary. I'm picking through it for reasons, plot reasons. So if you want to see a Gangrel who's a little bit more of an academic bent, go check out Beckett. Beckett's a cool cat.
Absolutely. One of the novels that I read with Beckett as like the main character was actually the Gehenna novel from back in the day. I'm reaching way back now, but way back. But it was actually like the first. I mean, I've heard about him from reading the Book of Nod, but the Gehenna novel was actually like front and center. Holy crap! I've got a front row seat to the to Gehenna, the end of the world as we know it, and here it is.
The end of all things. Yes. So yeah, those are some great reference points for the Gangrel.
Awesome. Well, great guys. We made it through another clan. Yay! And thank you to Ari for joining us and giving us her insights and her 2 cents on one of her favorite clans.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I nerded out the entire time.
I loved having you, and you're always welcome back, Ari. Maybe we can con you back for a little Team Pyramid talk. I mean, wait, what?
Wait, what?
Well, I always say, Ari, you're the Tremere after my own heart.
It's not like I snuck into a chantry or anything.
No,
like
not
that.
at all. You were always there, right?
Always. Just this old rug.
Yeah, that's right. All right, everybody. Well, as always, thank you for listening. And remember, our Patreon link is in there because we got to pay for the bandwidth to keep the lights on.
Yeah, so check out our Patreon page. Donate if you can.
And also give us a review if you like the show. Please, 5 stars or greater. I think this thing goes to 11 on iTunes.
Totally goes to 11.
Totally. All right. Well, thank you all. And we'll be talking at you soon. And we hope you enjoy the show. And we'll be talking to you later. Bye.
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 If you would like to reach us after our normal podcast hours, we can be reached on Facebook at Podcast by Night, on Twitter at By Night Podcast, or at our email at podcastbynight@gmail.com.